it was a humbling, stretching experience to say, okay, I'm actually going to step away from a career that God called me to. Like that was very clear that I was supposed to be a kindergarten teacher. And I loved being a kindergarten teacher. But now God was calling me out into something that was going to take a lot of faith and a lot of humbling to say, all right, I'm going to take a back seat on the financial provision for a period of time in our family. And my wife would take a front seat on the financial provision so I could really dive into some of the ministry things that God was calling me to do with more of my time, but also giving more of my time to loving my kids really well and being, more of the primary caregiver throughout some of the time, when our kids needed it.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Persisting in Purpose. Today, we have a fun episode. We get to meet with Keith Fortier, or as I like to say, Keith Fortier, because he's a fancy man.
At times.
But I'm so blessed by who you are, Keith, and from our conversations. And I really believe that those who are listening to this podcast, who are trying to grow in the ways that they live purposefully in their faith, are going to gain a lot out of this. And so I won't be able to do this for every episode, but I like to give little backstories to how I get to know people. And Keith is kind of a funny one. So my wife and I are adoptive parents, same as Keith and his wife. And we adopted through the foster system. We were foster parents first in California. And when we moved out here to North Carolina, as our youngest, our adoptive son, was getting older, we were trying to navigate what that could look like to enter into foster care and or adoption again out here. And to get our feet wet, we were like, maybe I will offer to do a free video for a Christian nonprofit in that space to start to learn where we fit in this. And so I reached out. I went on the website of Agape because I learned from someone who was fostering through them of the organization. I reached out to Keith because his title looked like the right title. And Keith immediately responds, "This is amazing. This is what we need." And then complete radio silence.
I ghosted you.
Yeah. And so I sent a few emails over the next coming months. Maybe it's just a month or something like that. And one of the life lessons I've learned is like persistence, especially on something that you know is good, is worth being persistent in.
Yeah.
And oftentimes God meets us on the other side of that persistence, rather than just giving up too early.
Yeah.
And so I bumped into him at an event at our church, the Summit, he was speaking at, and I went and sought him out, and we found a time to start creating some videos, and we've just been able to create some really cool stuff. But every time, Keith, I hear you talk about foster care, about caring for vulnerable children, about your story, your parents' story, the stories of the church surrounding this mission, I am challenged, I'm encouraged, and I'm excited for the future. So
that's good.
Keith, I'm excited to jump in and have you here today.
Yeah, well, I'm very thankful that you were persistent because we've found lots of amazing things that we can do together and found friendship along the way. Being fathers who've both fostered and adopted, and you caught me at an interesting time when things had been growing more complicated in life and ministry for me. And I had recently said to my director that I was like, churches really need a video to help them, especially at Foster Care Awareness Month, like a video that could help churches. And then your email landed at just the right time. And I was super excited and then caught in the middle of some administrative changes and people changing, and I just lost control of my email entirely, which is actually quite common for me. So I apologize to anybody that I've ever not responded to your emails.
If you're listening to this,
yes,
I apologize too.
Yes. But I'm thankful that you're persistent because we've been able to do some incredible work already together, and I'm excited for what's to come and excited for this conversation. I'm super thankful that I'm here to tell some more of my story and ultimately more of the Lord's story. Yes, right? Like the story that God has been writing in my life, because it doesn't really feel like my own. It's felt always bigger and more complicated, and more beautiful, more complicated than I could imagine, and more beautiful than I would have imagined.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to be telling the story.
Yeah. So right now you work for an organization called Agape of North Carolina.
Mhm.
For those who don't know what it is or what you guys do, give me a big picture of who Agape is and then what your role is specifically with the organization.
Yeah. So big picture, Agape is a certified, licensed foster care agency in the state of North Carolina. So we are able to train and license foster families, and then we partner with counties who are trying to find homes for children in need, and the counties will place children into our licensed foster homes. So we're a Christian agency. We get to do it all in the name of Jesus and for Jesus. And there are state rules that we have to kind of jump through certain hoops to make sure that we're doing it well, but we get to do it as a ministry, for the Lord, doing it the Lord's way. So that's at the core of who we are, is training and licensing foster homes, and then our incredible team of social workers that take care of those homes and help navigate the messy system that is foster care.
Yeah. And so you have a unique role within this. So tell us what that role is.
Yeah. So being a foster care agency, we get a lot of referrals from counties that are looking for homes for children. So we have on average like 125 referrals every single month. Sometimes referral calls, or we'll get emails with from a county, and that county is looking for a home for a child. Now we are like not even 60 foster homes total, and most of those homes already have children in them, and we're getting 100, 125 calls a month. And eventually, if you hear enough of those stories, right, you read the names of those children, you read their story, and you hear the social workers, whether it's from Wake County or Durham County or Alamance or wherever they're calling from, they're calling looking for a home for children in need, and knowing that they're calling every agency in the state and nobody has open homes for these kids.
Yeah.
You get enough of those phone calls and you read enough of those referrals, eventually you kind of start to break inside, where you're kind of like, this problem is so much bigger than us. And we're training and licensing foster homes as fast as we can. But what are we doing to actually see this crisis alleviated? Like, what are we doing to make it so that we get less of these calls in the first place, because more families are staying together? Or what does it look like to have more than enough foster homes, that we don't have counties frantically calling, trying to find placements? How do we alleviate this crisis? And the board at Agape and my director were dreaming some of those dreams, like what does this look like? And ultimately, the answer to this problem is not a foster care agency. The answer to the problem is the church, right? It's the people of God. It is the local church in each community having unity with the other churches and saying, how are we collectively caring for the need here in our city? Like, how are we caring for families that are struggling and helping families stay together? And how are we providing more than enough foster homes that are well supported and well equipped? So that's kind of where I got to come into the story with Agape. They were dreaming of somebody who could do that. And I was doing that in Boston before the Lord called us down here in North Carolina. I've been working with churches and helping build a network of churches that would, live compassionately and sacrificially to care for kids in need. So when I met the director of Agape, and she was like, "Hey, we've been praying and dreaming of having somebody who would do this here in North Carolina for us, and would you come do it with us?" It's been about 3 years now since I got to jump in with the team and be a part of it here.
So the work you were doing up in Boston area, was that through a similar kind of organization, or what did that look like?
No, it was very much just something that I stumbled into with the Lord.
Okay.
The short version of the story is that my wife and I started fostering. because there was a crisis in Boston. The particular crisis at the time was opioid exposed newborns. So there was opioid addiction was like raging across that part of Massachusetts, the Boston area and the Cape and the islands. And there's a crazy opioid crisis where the number of deaths were doubling every year. So like one year, like 400 opioid overdose deaths, next year 800, next year 1600, next year over 3000. And the number of opioid exposed newborns that were coming into the foster care system went through the roof. So Boston had, tons of young newborns that were staying in the hospital for long periods of time because of a lack of foster homes. They couldn't find homes. So we heard that and we're like, all right, well, if the people of God don't rise up and do something, then there's no solution to this problem. So we went and got licensed to be foster parents. It quickly turned into us and a couple of friends at our church. And we started realizing how hard this mission really was, that this was not something you just swoop into with a cape on your back and all of a sudden we solve all the problems. Like us and our friends started to struggle and we started to realize we need a lot of support. We need a lot of training. And we started basically just a little mini support group of us and our friends at our church, which grew into a larger support group, which then grew into a network of support groups. And our family fostering and a couple of our friends turned into half a dozen and then a dozen families at our church to then like 20, 25 families across our sister churches. Then we had so many friends that were struggling that I went out and became a trauma trainer. So I got certified in something called TBRI, trust-based relational intervention, which is just a set of tools for caring for kids from hard places. Oh, and I was teaching kindergarten all this while. So I'm a kindergarten teacher by trade. Early childhood ed is my thing. I actually taught all boys kindergarten for 12 years. So I'm teaching kindergarten, we're fostering, we're now running support groups. I'm now a trauma trainer and running trainings for other foster parents. And then us and all of our friends have social workers that are in our home every month. And the social workers are burning out and struggling, and social workers in our home and we're ministering to them like as they're struggling. And so then we start asking, okay, what does it look like for churches to intentionally love social workers? How do we get connected to our local office and hear about their struggles and hear how we can help? So we started figuring out, what does that look like? And then eventually other churches started saying, hey, how are you guys doing this thing? Like we want a foster care ministry like you guys have. We got to say to them, like, well, we don't really have a foster care ministry at our church. We have a culture where this is normal. We have a culture where, people understand what it looks like to step into these hard places, and a culture where it's normal for other folks in the church to be radically supporting the people who are doing it. So I got to help with some other churches, and there was a great nonprofit that helped my church and was serving my church and teaching us some wraparound care strategies. And I got to do things with that nonprofit up in Boston. But it collectively was just something that the Lord just kept inviting us into the next step. I was like, hey, what's the next step? What's the next step? And I kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the mission, to the point where then I was like, I think it's time for me to step away from teaching and just full time see what does it look like to support and mobilize churches to equip and care for foster parents well. So I quit my job at the school where I was teaching. We were actually living on campus at that school. So it had older students could board. It had students from all around the world. So we were dorm parents and we lived on campus at the school. And we just kind of in faith were like, it's time for me to step away from teaching and step away from that school so that I can full time try and find a way to, one, get paid and continue to support my family. Cause it was never anything that we were, making money doing. And two, just begin to leverage what God had built into us. Cause it was always me and my wife, not just me, but how do we start to leverage what God had put into us to have a bigger impact, and to reach more kids, who needed it.
So before you moved here, did you how long was it between leaving the teaching role and moving here?
There was about 2 years where I was doing, maybe about a year and a half, 2 years, where I was doing full time ministry in the foster care system before moving to North
And
Carolina.
how was that funded?
It was funded by a couple of part time jobs that I took that weren't helping churches. Nobody was ever paying me to help churches,
Yeah.
even though I knew that the local church was the answer, right? Like supporting churches as they figure out how do they navigate their place in the midst of the foster care system. Like that was what was the most important thing that I could be doing. But I needed to make some money. So now I was a certified trauma trainer. So I started running some trainings that I could get paid for. I started working part time with that nonprofit that was helping our church. Started running some trauma trainings with them. I became a in-home behavioral health partner for the state of Massachusetts, which simply meant like families that were struggling with really complex trauma needs,
Mm.
foster families that were caring for kids with really explosive behaviors, or adoptive parents that were considering disrupting the adoptive placement, like considering saying, hey, I know we adopted this child or children, but we can't do this. This is way harder than we expected. I got to be like in-home help for families that were struggling in that way. So I would get to meet with people one-on-one or meet, in their homes and care for them and really minister to people. So I was making some money from the state and some money from the nonprofit, but still trying to commit most of my time to loving and supporting churches.
Did that provide enough? What was that season like?
No, not necessarily. It was very humbling.
Yeah.
Because as I stepped away from full-time teaching, my wife stepped into full-time work to try and make sure that we were going to have enough, right? She was stepping out in faith and even stretching herself to step into the workforce in a different kind of way. She became a bookstore manager and a purchaser. And I was making some money, but I also became the primary caregiver, doing a lot of the drop-offs and pickups with our young kids and that kind of thing. And I did part-time work that I could fit around some of the kids' schedules. But it was a humbling, stretching experience to say, okay, I'm actually going to step away from a career
Yeah.
that God called me to. Like that was very clear that I was supposed to be a kindergarten teacher. And I loved being a kindergarten teacher. But now God was calling me out into something that was going to take a lot of faith and a lot of humbling to say, all right, I'm going to take a back seat on the financial provision for a period of time in our family. And my wife would take a front seat on the financial provision so I could really dive into some of the ministry things that God was calling me to do with more of my time, but also giving more of my time to loving my kids really well and being, more of the primary caregiver throughout some of the time, when our kids needed it.
That's huge. And so, how did Agape of North Carolina find you? Like, did you find them? Did they find you?
Yeah, it's a sweet and funny God story because the Lord made it clear that we are supposed to be in North Carolina. And that's a whole other long story. But
What's the condensed version?
the condensed version is like, if you could ever say that the clouds parted and the Lord spoke, it was that. There was this sense that we're supposed to be in Raleigh, North Carolina. Something happened in us and we're like, I think we're supposed to be down there. We couldn't articulate entirely fully why. Even when we were stepping out in faith that we were going to come down here, people were like, well, why? And we're like, there's this sense that there's a promise from God that we're supposed to be there. That it just feels like it's the promised land, not just because North Carolina has incredible weather or, anything like that, but which it does. But there was this sense that we were supposed to be here and something in our spirit didn't feel at home anymore. As soon as we felt like the Lord spoke that, we didn't feel at home where we were, even though we'd been there for 17 years and we had deep relationships and deep friendships. And we were a part of a church plant that we helped establish in Boston. And we just knew that this was the place that we were supposed to be. And our soul was not satisfied until we were obedient and got here. We came down here without jobs lined up, without a lot of clarity that some people would say that they need. But we just had this sense that, not the sense, we knew that the Lord had spoken for us to be here. And we knew that obeying what God was asking of us was so much more important than having all of the safety or all of the normal checklists of what the world would say is wise.
Mm.
So we told the Lord, like, all right, we're going to need a couple of miracles to make this happen. And as soon as we stepped out in faith and said, yes, Lord, if you part the water, we're going to walk through. So take, well, we took a few steps of faith, starting to sell our condo in, Boston, starting to change some things work wise and committing ourselves to moving. And when we dipped our toe in the water to start taking that step of obedience, like the water started to part, and we had a housing miracle, like total miracle, that set us up for a beautiful home here where our family could thrive. And we had a foster care miracle where our youngest daughter was still in Massachusetts custody and she was moving towards adoption, but it could have still been a year or 2 or 3 years. And we're like, we can't leave Massachusetts with our youngest daughter. We can't leave her behind. Like, she's supposed to be part of our family. And that case like miraculously wrapped up in like a timeline that does not happen in the foster care world. So God just completely freed us to move so quickly. And we knew that God was blessing it. His hand was on it. So we moved down here. I heard about Agape actually on the radio. It was a radio ad, and it blew my mind for a few reasons. Like, one, there's no such thing as Christian foster care agencies in Massachusetts. Like, there are agencies, but you couldn't actually do it like all in a Jesus kind of way. So I was like, whoa, Christian foster care agencies. That's amazing. So I reached out just because I was in a new place, and I was like, hey, I want to know what's happening here in North Carolina and how can I be praying, and what are ways that I can start to get involved. So I met with the director. I told her about everything God did in Boston. She told me about what's it like to run a Christian foster care agency. She told me about how the board had been praying for somebody like me and had put aside money and put aside a role description, because she couldn't imagine how you could just post for a job like this and then find the right person. Just in faith, she was like, okay, we're believing for this person, but we're going to wait until God sends the person. At that first meeting, she was like, I'm so glad you're in North Carolina. I believe that God sent you here because we've been praying for you. We've been praying for this. So we got a job for you if you want it.
And did you have the same confidence that that was the right thing for you when she said that?
Yes, I think I was surprised, but I guess I shouldn't have been, because this is how God does things. Like, he was surprising my family with even more of our own dreams. Like, in some ways it felt like we were walking away from things that had been built in Boston, but at that point we weren't really, like, the culture that was happening in Boston was on the move. Like, it was never about us. We were not needed there to sustain that culture.
Yeah.
But it felt like we were letting go and trusting God with something and stepping out into like the great unknown. But then we got here, and what I was doing in Massachusetts was like running around with all these part-time jobs, making a little bit of money, doing trauma training here, helping families here, trying to help churches this way. And then came here to North Carolina, and it just became healthier, right? There was a fuller, complete, one role where I could package everything that God was calling me to do and do it as part of a team of people, because the team at Agape was already incredible and doing incredible work. And I just got to join in and bring who I am and what God has put in me for supporting churches and mobilizing churches and creating unity in the body of Christ, and support networks for foster parents. What I could bring could complement what God was already doing. And I could do it in a healthier and sustainable way where I could still continue to be the husband and the father that I was supposed to be, and the ministry that I was called to be a part of.
Yeah. So before you moved, like you mentioned, sort of hodgepodge to provide, including your
Mhm.
wife taking on that role. How has God provided for you guys financially in this season?
Mhm.
Um, was this role one that could provide enough for you right off the bat? Was your wife needing to still work full time? What did that look like?
My wife still needed to work some part time in the transition. And as we were trying to navigate what would life look like in North Carolina and a lot of new nuances, and Agape is a nonprofit, and the nonprofit world often struggles for resources, and we're looking for donors, and even something like adding a whole new full-time position to a team can be complicated for a nonprofit. My director was really um, gracious and to me and my family, and wanted us to thrive and wanted to take care of us. And she knew that, right? Like, one thing that I haven't mentioned yet was like, we are a family of 6 kids now, forever kids. And m- more than half of my kids have some kind of complex need because of their histories and some of the trauma history that they've been through and some of the broken attachments that my kids have experienced. And we have a lot of complicated needs, which include things like feeding therapy and OT and lots of, attachment therapy and medical treatments and all kinds of stuff. And being a complicated family sometimes also creates complicated finances. Uh, But my director was good and committed to us and caring for us, and was able, to advocate and try and help get us to a healthy place. But even more than financially, I think the biggest thing that God knew we needed was a director that would understand the emotional complexities of being a family like mine who's living this mission inside our home and then also living it, 40 hours a week in the community and in ministry. And most people who sit in a role like mine, who have like a burning passion personally for the mission, there can be this tendency to completely burn yourself out because, like, I believe in this with all my heart, and I'm going to
Right.
spend all of my energy at home loving my kids and then spend all of my energy at work trying to, create an environment where more kids are cared for or more churches are living the mission, and never once slow down long enough to take care of myself or my marriage. And that's been the biggest gift that I feel like I didn't even know I need, was the way that the culture in Agape, and particularly my directors, like, hey, we are going to be people first who are well and healthy, and we're going to be healthy in our walk with the Lord, and we're going to be healthy in our marriages. And we're going to do this ministry that God's called us to. But if we can't do it in a healthy way, there's no point in doing it at all.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were or you are a parent of
Hmm.
6 children, 3 of which you adopted.
Hmm.
Um, were all of them adopted before you moved? I know you were finishing and you said you had that case, but was that the last of your children?
Hmm.
Okay, so all were before you moved to
Yes.
North Carolina.
Yeah. So our years of fostering, we were, Massachusetts state foster parents, and our youngest daughter, her adoption was finalizing like literally as we moved. It was like
Yeah, that's wild.
simultaneous. Yeah.
It's amazing to see how you have been able to go from a role that you said was calling, teaching, into something that feels like it's making even greater impact,
Mm,
long term impact, kingdom impact, eternal impact. When you're doing that on both sides, inside your home
mhm.
and for work, and I'm guessing the answer is not just one way, but do you find that those are often in alignment? So it's like, man, I feel like we're moving in alignment on one purpose and mission. Or do they sometimes be conflicting um, because you feel the weight and the challenge both in the home and outside of the home?
It's a really good question. Living this mission inside of my home. in so many ways, it does fuel what I'm doing in the community and outside of my home. Um, it makes me invite people into this mission differently. The biggest reason is that really this is not a very warm, fuzzy invitation to come and do something heroic that feels like we're changing the world. A lot of times people look at foster care that way, but once you really get into it inside your own home, it just feels heavy and hard. And it usually stays heavy and hard for a long time. It doesn't always get easy. And a lot of people who are fostering and adopting, they start to struggle with the feelings of, like, does this really matter? Or I'm not really seeing the fruit that I was expecting, or I'm pouring myself out and I don't really feel like I have a lot to show for it. And people can start to get a little disillusioned. They can start to lose hope. And it's really challenging and stretching. And being a person who's doing it in my house and doing it with my children and feeling those pressures, like feeling the weight of it in my own life.
Yeah.
And basically having to preach to myself what I'm saying in the community every day. Like every day when I'm out there inviting people into this mission, telling them that that the gospel is what calls us into this work. Like if it isn't a gospel-sized vision of Jesus laying down his life on our behalf, and then him inviting us to lay down our life on behalf of those who are most vulnerable, if we don't have that gospel clarity that brings us into the mission, then we don't have gospel clarity that's going to sustain us when it gets hard. And I'm living it at home, right? Like it is hard. Even these last few months have been intensely difficult in my home. And we have not seen, never mind seeing fruit that we hope and pray for, we've seen regression with several of our children where like some of their struggles are way harder than they were even a few months ago. And we are struggling, and my wife and I are struggling, and we feel that tension. And the struggles of our children are amplified by the struggles in us because their issues and our issues just start to collide, which then creates marital issues and that we're working through. And there's all this tension on every side. And I'm daily having to stop and like look in the mirror and remind myself why I'm doing this, right? Like this is not about me. It's not even ultimately about the kids I'm loving and caring for. Like it's about Jesus and it's about my own walk with him. Right. The fruit of my life is not on some outcome. Like the fruit of my life is my faithfulness to what God is asking me to walk in. And in these seasons of suffering, like I have to be able to remind myself of why I'm doing it and what the real fruit really is. And that message that I learn in the midst of my home is the same message that I have to carry out into the community, that like we are walking into broken places and we are not the savior, right? Like Jesus is the savior and he's with us, but we're just stepping into broken places and broken stories. And the way that we're going to see redemption in those places is by us taking that brokenness onto our own flesh. Like we are going to feel the weight of the brokenness in these places, and it's going to feel like it's crucifying us, which is exactly what Jesus did for us, right? Like he came and he took on our brokenness and it crucified him so we could be whole. And that's what this mission often feels like, is walking into broken places and carrying that pain on our own flesh. So I'm doing it at home and I'm inviting people in this way, which creates, hopefully when I'm out there in the community, it creates more motivation to keep on persevering within my home. And when I persevere within my home, it creates more motivation to invite people in the right way out in the community.
When I think of stepping into calling and stepping into things that are exciting, but also challenging, I don't think we often think about sitting in the hardship for long. Like we think of similar to what you're saying, the outcomes.
Yeah.
Like we're hoping for some victory And even in like the foster care and adoptive journey, it is so hard, especially in the initial stages, not to have a hero savior complex and view the end outcome and goal as a heroic saving
Mhm.
of a child, having to sit through that and navigate it and realize that a lot of the work that God is doing, not only in the children, but in you, is through the many, many days, weeks, months, years
Yeah.
of good and challenge.
Yeah.
Um, so when that's on both sides, it's like amazing to see alignment in family mission and vocational mission.
Yeah.
But that also means that the family challenge and the vocational challenge are also in alignment. And so it's like doubling up on both sides, which can be
Mhm.
painful and hard.
Yes. What I've found in whether it's family or vocation, right? For me, it aligned where the things I was doing in my home became what I do for work. I know that's not the case for everybody, but what I have found is that whatever we are doing, whatever we're setting our hands to, it's going to be shaping us in some way, right? Like the whole journey of being a human on this earth and being a human that's following Jesus, right? It is a journey of becoming who we're supposed to be, right? And
Mhm.
like we're never going to have say that we've arrived until we arrive, you know, in front of heaven's gates, and and we are, you know, a new creation. But on this side of heaven, we are going to be on a journey of becoming something. And whatever we're setting our hands to and whatever work we're doing is going to shape us. Right. There's that verse, you know, that like with unveiled faces, we are becoming like the likeness of Christ, right? Like unveiled is what we behold, like what we gaze on, and whatever we set our gaze on and whatever we set our life to is going to shape us and we're going to become like it. So how are we letting the things that we behold shape us into who we're supposed to be in that journey of becoming? Whether it's at home as a father, as a husband, or at work, realizing that we're being changed every day by the things we do, by the way we live, by what we allow our mind to think about. Right, these things are shaping us, and if it's not shaping us into the image of Christ, then we have to actually be cautious with what we're beholding and what we're setting our hands to. And for me, what I was doing inside of my home changed me like forever. Right, like this is like becoming a foster parent completely changed my identity. It changed the husband I am, it changed the father I am, and it's changed, how I spend the majority of my time. I now vocationally am an advocate within the foster care system and speaking at conferences and working with pastors to help them develop vision at their own church. If I had not said yes to the things that God was calling me to do in my home, then I would not become who God needed me to be today. Right? And that's that whole the whole book of James gives that tension of the things that we're doing, right? Like what we set our hands to, like the things that we're doing are actually helping us become like Christ. Where the book of James kind of like, talking about, are we being discipled and are we becoming like Christ so that we then can go get ready and do the things? He's like, no, okay, no, we have to do the things of the kingdom. And when we do the things of the kingdom, it actually forms us and shapes us into the image of Christ. We actually meet Jesus in the process.
Mm.
So there's some things that we only start to get when we say yes to following Jesus into those things. And if we never say yes and step out, if we never actually start doing the things of the kingdom, then we're never going to become who we're supposed to be. And I found that in my own home. Like every yes shaped me and changed me into a new person, which then has led me to the things that I'm doing today. And I'm still finding places where I need to say yes. And that's still shaping me and changing me. And I'm still becoming who God wants me to be. And that'll be the journey of my entire life, is a journey of hopefully saying yes to the things of the kingdom so that I can become more of who I'm supposed to be and be a little bit more whole and complete on the day that I arrive.
So, speaking of saying yes, let's go to the opposite of that, saying no.
Mhm.
So, in your role, it makes me think a lot of like being a pastor. A pastor's time is never not asked for or desired. There's so many different opportunities. And when you're in a vocational ministry, which I would almost, you could call what you do vocational ministry.
Mhm.
It's not for a church, but very similar kind of
Mhm.
long term goals. How do you manage saying no to things that can feel like the right thing because they're making kingdom impact, but it's not the right thing for your family, and stewarding leading 6 children and your wife well? So, how are you working through now that so many churches and peoples want your time? How are you making sure that you're not allowing that to overtake your responsibility as a father as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm still working on it. I have found that there is endless good things that I could say yes to, right? And not even good things. I would say there is an endless list of what feels like essential things that I should be saying yes to and doing. But figuring out what am I actually supposed to be doing is different than just saying yes to everything that's in front of me. So, when I moved to North Carolina a couple of years ago, I was coming from Boston where I had a big, beautiful network of people that I was connected to. Like I grew over the course of a decade into all that God had me doing in Boston. And I knew all of the people and what they did and what their roles were and who was passionate about what. And I had a lot of trust with everybody who was in the foster care ministry space. And then I moved down here in North Carolina and got swept up by Agape and now had a full-time job, but had no network of people and didn't know who was already doing this work here. So when I first got hired, I felt like I could just say yes to like everybody. I could say anybody who needed help with anything, like a church that needed help with any foster care strategy, any nonprofit that did foster care stuff that needed a trauma trainer to come speak, any foster parent support group that wanted, me and my wife to come and talk about, caring for your marriage in the midst of foster care. Like I could say yes to like everything because I was brand new and I had a wide open schedule. And then you flash forward 2 years in, and I was like drinking from a fire hose where there was an endless list. And I was still trying to say yes to everything like I did 2 years earlier. So, we're coming up on May, which is Foster Care Awareness Month. And last May is kind of when things hit a critical point where the wheels fell off for me, which was, I was saying yes to everything and everyone. And I ended up speaking, like, I think it was more than 25 times in the month of May. Like I took to a microphone on a stage somewhere 25 times, whether it was at a church on Sunday morning, and then I'd go to a different church in the afternoon and I'd speak at some, foster care focused event. And then on Tuesday night, there'd be some kind of event for this nonprofit around the foster care space. And I was driving all over the state and we got to early in June and my family was a train wreck. I was not healthy. I was not well. My kids were not well. And I realized that saying yes to every good thing was not what this life was supposed to be. Because one, I was not healthy and well, even in my walk with the Lord at that point, right? Like my priority number one is to be a child of God who is living from a place of rest and Sabbath in my soul and connected to the heart of the Father. And I wasn't even doing that well. And then my second biggest role was to be a husband to my incredible wife, Tanya. And I wasn't doing that well. And then my next biggest role was to be a father to my 6 beautiful children and to be there for them. And I wasn't doing that well. And then after those, right, after being a child of God and a husband and a father, then and only then should I realize, and there are ministry things outside. of my home and in my work that I'm supposed to be doing and doing those things well. But I had flipped the priorities all upside down and I had put ministry and work up on above the other core pieces of who I am. And doing that for, months or years brought us to a breaking point where this was not healthy or sustainable. So I've been on a journey since last May of finding some better rhythms and finding out how do I determine not necessarily like what are the essential things to be doing because they all feel essential, but like well actually what are the right things that I'm supposed to be doing? And how do I take what God has put in me and then leverage it to have the biggest impact possible? Because saying yes to every single church is not necessarily the best high leverage thing I can do to reach the most kids and families in need. So it's been a very strategic process of getting wisdom from other people around the country, getting wisdom from people here in North Carolina and determining, okay, what's my next step of faith and how do I keep becoming who I'm supposed to be right now? And how do I not abandon being a child of God and a husband to Tanya and a father to my children? Like, how do I not, abandon those things to be good at ministry? I'm like, because I have to be able to do it all.
I can't imagine that being easy, but I'm sure a lot of our learnings do come through pain and reaching a point where you're like, okay, that doesn't work. Now we need to move forward. So obviously this podcast primary purpose, persisting in purpose, I wasn't trying to say the word there. The primary goal isn't as much focused on a specific thing like adoption or foster care, but because it's something that I'm passionate about, you're passionate about, Agape is passionate about, and most importantly, God is passionate about. For someone who is trying to navigate at all, and they could be all across the country, not just here in North Carolina, trying to faithfully step into caring for vulnerable children, can you just give a brief understanding of what are some ways to start, what that could look like?
Yeah, that's good. And I'll probably even broaden it a little bit to whatever is the thing that you feel like God's calling you to do, especially foster care. Foster care and adoption, it feels like bigger than us and it feels often more complicated than what our mind and life can even handle. And a lot of people disqualify themselves pretty quickly. But that's not just true of foster care and adoption. It's usually true of most kingdom minded things that God is calling people to. Like often we disqualify ourselves because we're like, that feels bigger than me. That feels more complicated than what I can handle. And I feel like my encouragement, whether it's foster care or whether it's something else that people are feeling called to do.
Yeah.
Often God does not call us into things because we're equipped and because we feel ready and that we have more than enough wisdom and more than enough resources and more than enough energy for that thing. Like usually we feel like we don't have enough. Usually we feel like we're lacking for what is required to do the thing that God's asking us to do. But that's just almost every single story in the Bible. And it's almost every single story when you start talking to people who are living missionally today. Most people, their story is like, I didn't really have what it takes, but I said yes anyways. And then God showed up, right? Like that's what he does. Like all through scripture, that's what we've seen. Like he calls people, like Moses, who's like, I don't have what it takes to do this. Then he calls David, who's like, I don't think I got what it takes. And then the disciples and, all throughout scripture, there's all these people who are like, really? Me, God? Are you sure? And then you talk to people today and it's the same story now. Like you talk to people on the mission that God's called them to, and they're like, yeah, I did not feel like I have what it takes. Or even me, like right now, I'm like, I don't really feel like I have what it takes. I'm just showing up every single day with my pennies and asking God to multiply them. Like I'm showing up with my loaves and fish and being like, all right, this is all I got. So I think we spend a lot of time, especially, I'll say, especially people who are thinking about foster care, we spend a lot of time praying for clarity. We're like, God, am I supposed to do this? Is this right? Are you calling me to do this? When if we've been praying for clarity and praying if we should do it, and it's been something that's been on your heart for a while, it's probably time to stop praying for clarity and start praying for courage to go and do the thing that has been sitting there on your heart for a long time. Right. And for foster parents, that's true. It usually sits on their heart for years before they say yes, until they finally say, okay, I think I'm just going to have some courage to say yes. So it's true of foster care, and it's true of anything else that's a radical calling that God's put on your heart. Like at some point, we just be like, all right, Lord, give me courage. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to go put my foot in the water and watch you part it.
I really like that line. And I think it's worth repeating. You said, stop. Sometimes we need to stop praying or asking for clarity and start praying for courage. That's a good one to mull over and think about. So shifting things a little bit, as a lot of the people who listen to this and watch this are men navigating career, and career easily becomes a big part of our identity. And it can be wrong identity. But part of our role in career is being provider. And we touched a little bit on how you've had some unique seasons of provision between you, your wife.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that nonprofits often aren't the highest paying, how do you navigate when you get to a point where you're like, finances are tough?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, does it make you question your current role? Or how do you just navigate that tension of like, I feel like I'm doing what God's calling me towards, but the numbers aren't lining up anymore?
Yeah.
What does that look like for you? Or have you had to navigate that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we started navigating that, years ago when I became a kindergarten teacher, especially at a private school where a lot of private schools pay their teachers less. A lot of people think that it's more, but private schools will pay less, and it's a different kind of teaching environment. Or even navigating it back then when I was becoming a man who God was calling into early childhood education to work with young children. There's this tension of my identity as being a husband who needs to provide, but being a man who's called into a field that's usually dominated by women and paid very, very little. So I think the Lord was probably preparing me even back then for what does this look like to be a man who provides, but doesn't provide abundantly, right? Like, and knowing this tension, I feel like I had to wrestle with this tension of what is the message that the world is telling me? Because the world is giving us clear messages of what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a provider? What does it mean to lead and lead our family well? And the world is communicating a message. And there are things that we get from the world that are actually completely contradictory to what the gospel says and how the gospel is calling us to live, and like what is actually true and what is not true, and having to wrestle with the reality of saying yes to the missional life that God's called me to, in some ways has made me have to say no to the cultural expectations of what does it mean. And not even just say no, like realizing that they can't coexist. That if I'm saying yes to believing what the world says is right, then I'm not going to even be able to say yes to the mission. Like they can't coexist. They're at odds against each other. So early on, I had to abandon some ideas of like, what does it mean to be successful? Because the world tells us that we need to have really big, juicy bank accounts, and we need to take nice, fancy vacations, and we need to be in big, beautiful homes that have plenty of room for every kid to have their own room, and everyone's got their elbow space. And my kids do not have their own room, and our house is not what people consider to be big enough for 8 people. And I don't have some big, enormous retirement account. Like the world is saying that, like, you gotta have this and this and this and this to be successful. But that's not necessarily what God is saying that we're supposed to have. So in some ways I've had to say no to that American culture that the world sells to say yes to a gospel culture in my life. And that was a journey and a process. And it doesn't mean that it's always easy. And practically, it takes time and energy to even figure out, okay, how do we be a family that functions and functions well with what God has given us? And what is enough, right? How do we make sure we have enough to be the family that we're supposed to be and being okay with enough, right? Like being okay with having what we need, not always what we want. But that's complicated, especially in American culture that puts all kinds of pressures on us.
It is. It is a lot. And I think we can even have, especially in my home, the tensions of the children wanting the American culture
Mm-hmm.
and not seeing the purpose behind the gospel culture and how that impacts finances. So that's a unique tension as well. So I think in any career path, whether it's missional, whether it's just in traditional industry, it's easy to get tired and burnt out, even of something good. I know you reached that season last year where you're like, I'm doing too much and it negatively impacted my family. I'm not sure if you've reached a season yet in this role where there's burnout. But if you have, how do you maintain your not just passion, but ability to continue to move forward through the burnout?
Oh yeah, I've had I had a friend from Brazil I was talking to recently, a man who does a lot of ministry, and he says, "Oh yeah, burnout. I had burn out, I had burn on, I had burn in," and like in his sweet like broken English, she's like, "I had every kind of burn there could be." And I've often described it as people find that compassion moves them into this work, but then they find compassion fatigue. Where I'm like, I found compassion fatigue, and then right after compassion fatigue is compassion death, where you're like, nah, I'm just dead. I got nothing left to give. But yeah, there's seasons of it over and over and over again. And what I've discovered in that burnout and compassion fatigue is this tension that we want to be fruitful. Like we want to have a fruitful life in our ministry. We want to be able to have plenty to show for. It's like, look at what I've done. Like I've created this many foster homes with what I'm doing. And I have this many churches that are partnered with me, and those churches are thriving in this way. And I've got relationships and collaboration with this many government officials and I'm building these strong networks of nonprofits and churches and government collaboration and all these things. Like we want to have something to show. We're like, and then we make that our worth. We're like, look what I've done. Look what I've created, right? Like, look at the fruit of my life. And whether we know it or not, right? Like that's what the cultural norm is telling us, that we have to be successful. We have to have fruit to show, right? So we're like, look at my big juicy fruit that I've created with my life. And then people will know how awesome I am. But a tree with all of its big, healthy looking, juicy fruit, if it has no roots, then you're like one storm away from that entire tree being on the ground. And that's what I found even in my good motivation, right? Like my gospel centered motivations where I'm like, I'm doing this for the king and for the kingdom. I'm doing this for the children that are precious to him. And like, I am so driven in this gospel minded ministry to create fruit. But if I'm not doing it in a healthy way with healthy roots, then it's not really going to be sustainable. So I found that multiple times over, like where I was like, yeah, my tree's on the ground right now. Like I might look like I've got some good fruit hanging from my branches, but the whole tree's on the ground. And through therapy and counseling and good brothers that I'm walking with and getting my tree upright and then learning like better more sustainable rhythms of actually having healthy roots. And then learning that a healthy tree is aggressively pruned. All right. Like if you're going to have an apple tree, the amount of pruning that happens on that tree, like they're cutting off major branches that you think are important. But a master pruner knows which branches are going to be cut. And then when you cut off those massive branches, what's left is branches that produce healthier and sweeter fruit. Whereas if you left the branches before, you might have a lot of fruit, but it would be a little more tasteless, and it wouldn't be the right kind of fruit. So trying to figure that out in my own life, like, okay, what needs to be pruned? What are the things that I think are important that God actually wants to cut? And then how do I establish roots? Like which roots are the things that nobody ever sees. Nobody ever is like, people will applaud the fruit in your life and be like, wow, look at all that you did. Nobody knows the secret life of Christ that's happening for me, right? Like nobody knows my own rhythms of abiding in Christ, my own rhythms of rest and solitude, of being in the word, of being somebody who is pursuing his presence, right? Like in those things that happen in the secret place are the roots that make my life healthy and sustainable. And the pruning that God does, it might look like less fruit, but it's the right fruit. So that's been like a whole journey that I've had to figure out well.
Yeah. Those are some great analogies that I think help us to see that. It's not a simple one-way answer, but strong roots are what are necessary to survive the burnout.
Yeah.
And continue on.
Yeah. Without roots, you don't survive storms. And without pruning, you don't create the right fruit.
With a lot of career paths and jobs that the average person does, it's easy for it to not feel mission aligned or purpose filled. You know, if I got my engineering degree, if I'd gone straight into engineering, I did an interview for an aerospace company, I could see how easily it would feel like outside of the people that I'm pouring into, this is more of a paycheck in using gifts that God has given me versus like feeling purpose filled in what I'm doing. And one of the ways that we can attain extra levels of purpose is by doing stuff outside of work to align with purpose-driven missions and visions. And so with that said, we talked a little bit about how someone could get involved with serving and caring for vulnerable children. For those seeking ways to step in, how could people come alongside an organization like Agape to make impact through that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think organizations like Agape, and there are many of them that are working to try and create solutions to families that are struggling in vulnerable populations, and wherever city you are, wherever you live, there are vulnerable children and vulnerable families, and there are good people who are trying to help. And most of the time, those nonprofits or churches or whoever are the people who are trying to help, they're feeling like lonely and often unsupported, or feeling like there's just a general attitude of there's not enough help. Even if you take an example of like a nonprofit that's helping young men and women who've aged out of foster care, right? So kids who grew up in foster care, never were adopted, and they turn 18. Those young adults often struggle fiercely just because of loneliness and no community and no family and housing struggles and education struggles and transportation struggles and often early pregnancy and addiction rates and homelessness rates and incarceration. And if you follow the thread all the way through, like young men and women who age out of foster care often have like as much of 20 years less life expectancy, just because of all the vulnerabilities that they face. So there's all these nonprofits who are trying to help, but they need mentors and people who will walk with these young men and women. They need people who do housing to bring housing skills, and people who are employers to actually create trauma-informed employment, and they need, people who will create meals and atmospheres to, atmosphere to create community. There's all these layers of vulnerability for this one population. And most people don't realize that they could do anything to help, but almost everybody could do something, right? Even if you take that one example, and there's so many examples of ways that people could get involved. That one example of young men and women aging out of foster care, if you're a restaurant owner, you could be cooking food. If you cut hair, you could be cutting hair in a way where you're loving and mentoring people. Like if you are a home, like you could be opening your home to create family. Like if you're an elderly couple, you could be mentoring, a young boy who's trying to go off to college without anyone supporting them and cheering them on. Like there's all these avenues for support, but most people won't take the time or energy to actually figure out how to get their real life involved. Most people are willing to like write a check and send some money or buy a gift at Christmas time or something, but usually what's really needed is relational support, like people to get their real life involved. So regardless of what it is that you do, there is a way to help, right? Like if you make videos, you can find a way to make a video that makes a difference, just like you've been doing. So I think, but most people just disqualify themselves. We're like, oh, that's complicated. I don't really know what I would do. It's not like a lack of motivation. They just don't know the first step to take.
Yeah. Yep. There's always something that can be done. But taking a step into something. But yeah, I think that's super helpful. So the last question I'm going to ask, I'm going to slightly twist a question that I typically ask. So the typical question is, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? What advice would you give surrounding purpose and career? But I'm going to shift that a little in this case. What would you tell yourself before you moved from Boston into doing what you're doing now? What encouragement or things would you equip yourself with to be able to better handle what God has placed you in now in your role?
Wow, that's a good question. So you said, what encouragement would I give myself?
Yeah, knowing what you know now,
Yeah.
living the life you've experienced the past 3+ years, what would you tell yourself before you moved to better set yourself up for success for the mission that you're currently on?
I think that when I look back, I had some fear of the unknown. And I had fear of darkness and pain in the world that I felt helpless to actually make any difference in. And I would tell myself back then of just how much authority the people of God really have. Right? I think when Jesus said, I'm going to build my church and the gates of hell won't prevail against it, he really meant that, right? That like where darkness is prevailing, that the church can and will show up and shove back that darkness. And I didn't believe it on the scale that we're seeing it now. That collectively, when there's unity in the body of Christ, the group power to shove back darkness is more than I could have ever imagined. And we're seeing it like in counties, but I feel like we're seeing it in homes, in churches. Like collectively, people are starting to realize the authority that we have and the authority we can walk in, where we can hope for and dream for something bigger or better than I ever imagined. It doesn't mean that it's not costly or painful, like we were talking about, that entering into those places and pushing back darkness has a gospel-sized struggle to it. But there's a gospel-sized freedom that we can and that we should expect. Right? I don't think I myself years ago would have expected to see what we're seeing now. And it's not because of anything having to do with like how good or how great I am. It just has everything to do with the authority that God's given us. Um, So if I could tell myself back then something, it would be a message of understanding the authority that we walk in and the power we have as being the church.
Yeah. I think that's so helpful in just recognizing and looking back at how God has moved, at his power, his strength. It's so much easier to give that insight. And honestly, what you just gave to yourself 3 years ago is what you're going to need probably 3, 6 months, 8 months, a year from now.
Yeah.
That same encouragement, knowing that the same God who has moved the past 3 years is the same God who's going to continue to be with you in that.
Amen.
Well, Keith, there's so much we could talk about here.
Yeah.
And we could continue going on, but I think this is really helpful in sort of shaping your unique career path and what that's looked like and how God has been instrumental in guiding you through that. And so, for any of you who are listening or watching to this, I hope that it's just been an encouragement to you that you can hear his story, that you can hear how God uses challenging situations, uses brokenness, allows us to step into that brokenness, even bring on the pain and suffering on ourselves to create something beautiful. And when we recognize and make sure that we see that we aren't the hero of the story and that we are just a vessel allowing Christ to work in and through us, we can be a part of profound impact.
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful you would come on, and thanks for taking the time today.
Oh, I am so grateful to have been here. I'm glad we got to talk.
Awesome. We'll see you in the next episode.